Okay, Kevin, teach us.
Okay, so this is for the shir will be is dedicated to all the soldiers, that they should be successful in their mission and return home safely and return the hostages home safely and destroy the enemy.
Right.
Okay, so this week's parsha is Vayera, and it's all as we discussed yesterday. One of the main features is the Akedat Yitzchak, where Avram was commanded to sacrifice his son, and he did it with alacrity because he had great emunah. Many people wouldn't do such a thing, because he thought he thought he was actually gonna, the whole thing would go through from start to finish, and he'd actually kill his son as a sacrifice to Hashem. So Hashem tested his emunah, and his emunah was so strong that he was stopped at the last minute by the angel when the knife was at the throat of Yitzchak. And I don't know how many people would have such emunah to do such a thing to one of their precious, to someone, a loved one, to do, who would do such a thing in this day and age, if they had a divine message. I'm sure there are people in the world that would do it, but I think most people would have a very difficult, wouldn't be able to make that immediate decision to go through with it.
I think even in those days, you would have found no one. He's very unique. That's why he's Avraham Avinu. There's not many people. There's people with tremendous emunah. That's one of the few things that I don't know how many people would actually be able to do, even in those generations.
Listen, I've got a son, and oftentimes, without God's instruction, I want to kill the kid.
Yes, but that's in your timing. That's in your own timing. This is not when Hashem tells you when to do it.
Yeah, exactly. You're commanded to do so.
Can you imagine trying to kill your son when you're not cross with him? Not so easy. You're trying to kill him when you cross with him.
Yeah. Well,
Abraham wasn't cross with Yitzhak at all. That's the problem. That's
you know what's the interesting part is that when you hear about these Christian Bible stories, one thinks of Isaac as a boy. He was actually 37 years old.
30, yeah, that's 30. That's correct. And I think 35. He got married at 37. Was he 35 or 37?
I thought
one of that doesn't matter.
I thought no. I thought in the same year, as far as I knew, was 37, because in the same year that he had the feminine aspect of himself, and when he went on Al Qaeda, he partially wasn't here in this world, but the masculine aspect of whatever was there was missing, came back. So it happened at the age of 37. But one thinks he had to tie this little boy, and nobody ever says it's a trial for Yitzchak, because it couldn't have been easy. I mean, he knew what was going to happen, didn't flinch. So that's why his father tied him down. He didn't want him to flinch and make the avoid a puzzle. All right, guys, let's go to the next part.
Yeah.
And Kevin, well done, because we're learning every session. So the bottom line is there was a discussion on Kilayim with Rabbi Akiva, who taught in a brisa that you can't wear customs to evade paying taxes. Okay, so Rabbi Shimon said in the name of Rabbi Akiva, it's permitted to wear kilayim to avoid customs. Okay, now the opinions aren't about, which was interesting enough, evading customs, because you can evade customs if those customs or tax duties are gotten through ill-gotten gains, because Rav Chanina Bar Kahana said in the name of Shmuel, it's for a tax or custom collector who has no limit on the amount that he collects, and therefore has lost the authority of the king, because the king would not approve he might approve of the methods of collecting if he's not a very nice king, but certainly that he didn't get share that he expected to get, or that the collector is overcharging and not having a proper structure in the way that he collects. But the Academy of Rav Yanai went one further and said he didn't even have the king's permission. So in that way, you can evade customs or taxes because it doesn't contravene what Shmuel had said, the law of the kingdom is the law. Meaning, if it's legitimate taxes, and those taxes go to the infrastructure and betterment of a society, is one of the 7 Noahide laws to build systems and courts of law. There has to be proper processing and funds to be able to do it. So, accordingly, Rabbi Akiva holds that something that is unintended is permitted, meaning that the primary intention of wearing kilayim is to keep warm. Okay? And therefore, if he's already wearing 9 layers of clothing, the 10th one isn't going to have any utility, and that's going to be used just to evade taxes. And the prohibition, according to Rabbi Akiva, is wearing kilayim. So it's not contravening it because there's no benefit of wearing it, because with 9 other layers of clothing, it certainly doesn't add to its function. Now, the other master, which is the Bava Kamma of the Mishnah and the Brisa, well, it's actually specifically Rabbi Yehuda, if you want to know. He said that if there is a secondary benefit, there is a problem, because that even if it's unintended, it is forbidden, meaning that he sees primarily as a prohibition of wearing kilayim, the fact that you're getting use out of kilayim, and the prohibition is getting some sort of benefit of kilayim. It's not the wearing of it, it's the kilayim itself. And evading taxes through kilayim by both wearing as an article of clothing as opposed to having merchandise, which you would be taxed, or looking like a non-Jew, at which you wouldn't pay the Jew tax. The way, even though that's not the Pasuk's direct intention, because it's the wearing of kilayim, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's a problem because you can't get benefit from kilayim. Wearing is one direct benefit, but if there's a secondary benefit, you can't get an indirect benefit from something that is prohibited. Okay, so now we've dealt with that issue. And the Gemara records a third context, teaching it according to the following Mishnah. And this is in the Nadarim 27b. Okay. Now, what are Nadarim, guys? You know what they are.
Just repeat that. What did you say?
What
is this?
Gavin, Nadarim. You know what Nadarim is?
Yeah, Kevin knows.
Vow.
A vow.
Vows. Neder. Neder, Nedarim.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Give us
So, what we are
Thanks,
talking
Kevin.
about here in the following Mishnah, in Nadarim 27b, is that you can declare a vow to murderers, plunderers, or custom or tax collectors that might not be on the surface totally true. So that's quite something. So if one had a debt collector come to him who was a known murderer, thief, a plunderer, or a custom tax collector, and had a group of cronies with educational tools to make you change your mind, rods and things to beat a person, you can lie to them. And he can lie by saying, because the produce, he basically is a farmer and he's got produce, and they want to steal from him on the basis of taxes, of saying he owes it for tax, whether it's legit or it's obviously not legit. We talk about a previous case. So he's allowed to say it's truma. And what is truma? It's produce that is forbidden to a non-Kohen. So in other words, these normal murderers, etc., plunderers and custom tax collectors wouldn't eat food that is forbidden for them, produce that is only allowed for a Kohen. That's one sort of thing. So the farmer's lying and saying it's actually truma. It's set aside for the kohanim, or that it belongs to the royal court, where they might fear the wrath of the royal court, or even if the royal court didn't know, they want to have enough common sense to know that it's not assigned for them. So even though it's not truma, and even though it doesn't belong to the king, he can lie. Now, this was a question I asked Rabbi Goldschmidt, because I said, how is it possible that somebody that's a murderer can all of a sudden hold the standard that he's not prepared to eat truma, which is reserved for a Kohen? I mean, even most non-Jews don't murder, and they would figure that this is a sin. Why is it okay to murder or plunder or steal, but you're worried about eating a Kohen's truma? I mean, surely you've debased yourself to the level where that's a minor infraction compared to murder. So Rabbi Goldschmidt said to me that the reason why this will deter them from seizing the produce by saying it's truma or royal property is that although they're sinners and even murderers, they wouldn't eat forbidden food such as truma, and certainly they'd be afraid to take royal property. Now, I said to him, how can that be? He said, the human condition is very, very strange. You get certain people in business that are frum, that do things that are not questionably allowed, you know what I'm saying? And yet they're scrupulous about keeping Shabbos. People are mentally ill. They're mentally ill. They'll choose some things to be very strict on and other things to be quite variant on. And I honestly thought it didn't make sense to me. And then I read a book that I bought from Renana when I went to visit Arthur, called Only His Mother Could Love Him. It's about Jewish gangsters in the 20th century that were horrific human beings, and yet some of them were Jewish, some of them were even frum. The one guy was very proud of himself that he never killed on Shabbat. And after reading that, I thought to myself, well, what do you know? I'm not joking, guys. I'm really, really not joking. I'll show you a picture of the book when we're done. So anyway.
Well, I'm still quite impressed with this guy. Just fractionally impressed, marginally.
Well, a fractional impression is what he left on most of his victims.
That's true. Well said. Kevin, you enjoy that.
The truth is, if the guy doesn't kill on Shabbos, it's also an improvement, because normally you kill every day. So it's actually like on the level of Moshe, and not killing on Shabbos.
Arthur, I wouldn't quite push it that he's on the level of Moshe Rabbeinu.
Yeah, maybe Moshe
Van Rensburg.
Van Rensburg, yeah.
Arthur, Moshe splits the seas and he splits open skulls. Little different.
Yeah.
So
Moshe Van Rensburg and Moshe Rabbeinu, two different people, but same name.
Yeah, I agree they both had a stick and they probably split different things. But so bottom line is you're allowed to do a false. What?
The both split the sea of red.
Yeah, it's true. So guys, in order to bolster his false assertion, the owner of the produce can declare a neder, a vow. For example, he may say that the produce in question is not truma or royal property, or the produce in the world is forbidden to him. So he turns around and he says, no, you can't eat it, it's truma for a Kohen. And they say, really? Would you prepare to swear a vow to it? And he's a frum Jew. And he does. And he says, if this is truma, may all of this produce, say they were watermelons, be banned for me for the rest of my life. Okay? Or whatever the case may be. So he's actually has to be more general. He has to say, all the produce in the world is forbidden to him. Now, provided was his intent to prohibit the produce of the world for a limited time, in other words, in his head, it's that day that he won't have watermelons, or that minute that he won't have watermelons. it actually becomes permitted to him once that period of time passes. Now, it seems weird because it appears to contradict the principle, words of the heart are not words of the heart. What does that mean? It's a saying in the Judaic sources that once spoken intent is disregarded. It's about the principle that the produce of the world should be forbidden to him forever, because he didn't audibly say what was in his mind. He said, I won't have that produce and it's forbidden to me in the world. Okay. He didn't say for a moment, for a day, because he wanted his false vow to be believed. But it actually wasn't false, because in his head, he was just saying, no, I'm not going to have it for the day. But the contradiction is, well, how can you have speech where you make a vow where it's different to your mind? In other words, he is keeping the vow of his mind, because in his in his mind, he says, well, I did make an oath, so in my mind, I'm saying that I won't have watermelon for the day. Okay, but from then on, I can have it. But aloud to these guys, he's saying, I won't have watermelon. Now, surely that's prohibited because his mental intent and his verbal intent are contradictory, which makes him have no integrity. So, because under this principle, the produce of the world should be forbidden to him forever, since he limited the term of the prohibition only in his thoughts and not in his speech. But the reason why there is halachic leniency is because he declared the neder under coercion, and therefore it allows him to observe the prohibition only for the time he had in his mind. Now, it is a problem if he had in his mind that he never specified the time limitation, but any sort of coercion is seen as a halachic or legal leniency. So, for example, we see cases in the Gemara where they make you sign a contract and three guys are holding you down and putting the pen in your hand and saying, I'd suggest you sign this because we're going to break your kneecaps. That is under coercion. That's not a willing. It's not a willing participant. Believe me. So the robbers assumed that he did mean to prohibit all the produce of the world on himself forever, if his claim is untrue. They believed him because he's a frumiyid. So they consequently led to believe that produce that he said is teruma or royal property is something that they cannot have as non-royals or non-kohanim, as Israel or Levium, and they are going to refrain from taking it. Okay? So that was just something I wanted you guys to bear in mind. Just give me 1 sec. Are there any questions so far?
Devin has one.
Yeah.
Sorry, on the neder, when you before a fast day and not Tisha B'Av or not Yom Kippur, there's a if some people say you should have the intention to do it, if you, let's say it's a nominal fast, like someone wants to take on or a fast because there hasn't been enough rain in a certain country, they have to actually have that intention on the mincha before, and it says so actually in the Siddur.
I didn't know
that you need to have that intention, and otherwise you may not have to do it, but it doesn't say expressly that you have to verbalize it. Just says it has to be a mental intent, the mincha before. Like if it was tomorrow, when I'd have a mincha today, I'll have to have in mind, but during Shemona Esrei, that I'm going to do that fast.
So you can, but then it's another problem, and that problem is that of a Nazir. Is that a Nazir is praised because he's refraining from wine and certain other devices that he might find that he's got an addictive personality towards. So if he's holding at a high level and he's restraining himself from drinking wine, Kevin, you will tell me why consider him to be problematic also. Why is that?
Refraining from grape-related products, including wine.
No. So what I'm saying is as follows. A Nazir is on one hand praiseworthy because the halacha doesn't demand of him to give up wine. He's done it in order to elevate himself spiritually. So on one hand, he's a tzaddik. On the other hand, he's criticized because for if any reason he doesn't keep his oath on something he was not halachically obligated to, and now he's halachically obligated to keep his oath. He's created sin for himself because the Torah didn't demand from him to give up wine. So in other words, one can only take on a vow like that to abstain from food or drink or any sort of abstinence. Obviously, there has to be an intent, but failure to do that, it actually is an avera he could never have caused on himself ordinarily if he just stuck to the halacha. So it's got to be people that are physically healthy and can hold up to that self-discipline. So the bottom line of the question in the Gemara is that how can you lie to a collector of taxes or a custom collector? We understand why you'd lie to murderers and plunderers because they're not collecting for any rhyme or reason. They just say, if you don't pay, I'm going to hurt you and hand over your produce. And he's saying, well, it's truma and a non-Kohen can't have it. And they're scared of being non-Kohanim to have it because it's forbidden to them. So as far as the tax collector is concerned, how do we answer the question why Shmuel said the law of the kingdom is the law, meaning we have to pay taxes, even without declaring a false neder vow? It's forbidden to evade customs. And the answer is Rav Chanina Bar Kahana said in the name of Shmuel, the Mishnah refers to a customs collector who has no limit to the amount he collects. And then the alternative answer is in the Academy of Rav Yanai, that said the Mishnah refers to a custom collector who appointed himself without the authority of the king. So in the one case, he had agency and authority from the king, but he abused that by not working out taxes accurately, being very heavy and burdensome on some people and very lenient on others, and didn't work out the correct sort of formulas for collecting taxes. In other words, there might have been staple foods like maize or grain that said the poor people can not pay taxes on that, but on certain other items, yes. So then he lost the agency of collecting on behalf of the king when he doesn't fulfill the king's mandate correctly, and the king would not be happy for him to carry the royal seal because these tax collectors paid the king once per annum, but they still had to work within the confines of a good image for a monarch. So there's a third answer by Rav Ashi who says this is in reference to a custom collector who is a Canaanite, who collects more than the king authorized him to. So why are we mentioning this Canaanite thing according to Rav Ashi? Because Canaanite tax collectors would typically assess higher fees than stipulated by the king. And for that matter, guys, any tax collector who exceeds his mandate has broken his agreement with the king and loses his right under the principle of the law of the kingdom is the law to collect even the authorized amount. So if you guys want to know why, is that when you don't fulfill the instructions of the king, even that which he authorized you to collect, you no longer have the enjoyment of being his legal representative in order to collect it, even if it's the legal amount, because other things that you're doing are not within the king's approval. And you're not required to pay him anything, and all the money that he collects is stolen. Now, aside from this issue with the Canaanite tax collector, according to the Meiri and all the other sources, if he is suspected of exceeding the limit, and in fact, guys, the rabbis determined in a later period of Jewish history that every tax collector was no better than a Canaanite tax collector and is assumed to be guilty of this crime and practice of overcharging unless proven otherwise with evidence. And that's a Bryson Sanhedrin 25b. That's by the Rambam and the Torah even. So Rav Ashi lived in a period of time where it was mainly that Canaanites had transgressed the sin, and discusses in Nadarim and Kilayim that this was with non-Jewish authorities, but later the rabbis seemed to see that this was a human condition that even affected Jewish people. Okay, so the Gemara discusses another situation involving a Canaanite who breaks the law, because it was taught in a brisa, and when a Jew and a Canaanite robber come for judgment, if you can exonerate the Jew under Jewish law, exonerate him, and say to the robber, this is our law. And if you can exonerate the Jew under Canaanite law, exonerate him and say to the robber, this is your law. So you may employ stratagems against the robber, because this is not a normal Canaanite. It's a Canaanite who has a reputation of being a robber, and he sues the Jews in a Jewish court for money that's owed to him, but his character is dubious. No one's quite sure if he's legit or there's a legitimate claim. So here the Brisa speaks of a Canaanite who's not only known to be a robber, but he might be just a fraudulent person. And the courts have reason to believe he will simply steal from the defendant or defraud him. And under those circumstances, Rav Yishmael rules that despite the defendant's liability, even if it looks like a genuine case, the court can take measures to save him from paying. I mean, they can postpone the case quite a few times until the Canaanite is fatigued, so that the anticipated theft will not cause him a net loss or con merchantry. In other words, we could say that he owes the Canaanite money, but the Canaanite didn't really service deliver properly on what he said he was going to do. He did a very, very low quality job. Alternatively, it's saying, look, there can be a violent Canaanite, and if he doesn't go to the court, he's going to physically aggrieve the defendant. So in that case, if the court intervenes and says to the Canaanite that if you touch this Jew, you're going to be arrested and you're going to spend years in jail, and he does not owe you the money, then he's got the protection of the courts. Now, according to the Meiri, the Brisa concerns only certain categories. What does it concern? This issue of how we treat a Canaanite different, according to the Meiri, says, look, it's dealing with the Canaanites of iniquity, meaning the biblical Canaanites, right? They weren't regulated by the Noahide laws. They didn't have universal principles of morality and justice. Killing, stealing, and having affairs was the practice of the day, and therefore it's a problem to give them any sort of legal upswing. However, if you're a non-Jew of any civilized nation that recognizes Hashem, even though the religion is distant from Judaism, in other words, there's some Trinity issue, some Buddhist Christian issue or whatever, but they have some idea of courts of law and rules and regulations in terms of stipulation of recognizing there is moral conduct, and they conduct themselves morally, they must be treated exactly as any Jew in all financial dealings without any discrimination. So if he sues a Jew in a Jewish court, the judges are not allowed to deviate a hair's breadth from the Jewish law regarding the circumstances. Okay? So, and many go according to this opinion, in fact, most. So it emerges that this Brisa and the Gemara's ensuing discussion are limited only to the era of the Talmud, and they don't have any practical application nowadays. It's talking about a case when you had idol worship and very cagey, heavy people. Okay, So it's saying in that case where nobody would listen to the law, if you knew that the Jew would have a better outcome with this Canaanite idolater, if he went to a non-Jewish court, then tell him to go to a non-Jewish court because it would help the Jew. We'd say these are the rules in your court. If it would help to take him to a Jewish court and the Jew would win, you take him to a Jewish court. But if he is not an idolater or adheres to some religious practice that serves Hashem's law, you cannot employ stratagems against that sort of robber. So these are the words of Rav Yishmael. Now, not everybody agrees. Rabbi Akiva is of a different opinion, even when it regards idol worshippers, because he says you're not allowed to employ stratagems against the robber on account of the sanctification of the divine name. So what is he saying? If the court acts in a way that leads the plaintiff to think he's being treated unfairly, the judges will have committed a Chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's name, which is a cardinal sin. So if the defendant is liable under Jewish and Canaanite law, they must rule against him if he happens to be Jewish and compel him to pay. So Rabbi Akiva follows this rule, and the Meiri follows from Rabbi Akiva. As far as Rav Yishmael is concerned, he's saying that no, when you're dealing with somebody that's known to have a bad reputation, or they do not adhere to any morality, you can use any stratagems you want to do. But Rabbi Akiva says, although in normal cases, the stratagems themselves are not necessarily prohibited, the problem is it's going to create an impression on the part of the plaintiff, or even his compatriots or his social circle, that being treated improperly is what Jews do to get out of payments from non-Jews. Therefore, that would constitute a Chilul Hashem, a desecration of the name, and that cannot happen. Now, what I want to do is I want to go through you guys, I've got about 5.5 minutes, some of the principles regarding Jew and non-Jew. Okay. So before we go through that, I'm just going to fill in Arthur because Gavin's certainly aware from Sanhedrin about a Chilul and Kiddush Hashem and what you mean to give up your life for. So Arthur, basically, if a non-Jew asks you to work on Shabbos, but he just wants you to do a work on the Shabbos because he wants the produce, not because he's trying to get you to break Shabbos, you can't do that work on the Shabbos if you're going to get eaten or seriously risk your health, because he's not doing it to test whether you keep Shabbos. He just wants output on the Shabbos. But if he's doing it to prove to himself and others, in front of other Jews and non-Jews, that this Jew is going to break Shabbos, a person has to give up his life rather than desecrate God's divine name. And even goes so far in Sanhedrin to say, if it's a minhag, not even halacha, but it's going to cause a desecration of Hashem's name, that one has to give up their life rather than do that. The other two cardinal sins, Arthur, is that one is meant to give up their life rather than have sexual immorality. So if somebody puts a gun to another Jew's head and says, either you sleep with this married woman or we kill you, he's going to have to say, I have bullets for breakfast, evening and morning. So he's going to have to take it. And the other issue, the third issue, is the Gemara uses that term in Sanhedrin. Gavin remembers, whose blood is redder. So if somebody puts a gun to the head of the leader of the Jewish people, a leader of the Jewish people, and they say to him, unless you kill this Jewish drug addict, we're going to kill you, he's got to say, I'm not going to do it. And you say, but why? He's the leader of the Jewish generation. He's a tzaddik. This drug addict is no good. He doesn't do anything. And the Gemara says, we really don't know whose blood is redder, meaning whose blood is more important. And you say, but it's obvious, it's a tzaddik. But we don't know if this drug addict is ever going to clear himself up one day and overcome his addiction, or maybe impregnate some Jewish girl in his drunken state or drugged up state, and that kid ends up being the leader of the next generation. We have no idea. We have no idea. The important thing is that one Jew cannot take the life of another Jew, because you can't call it self-defense. The concept of a roidef, Arthur, is when somebody is running after you, and therefore to self-defend you can kill. But therefore this case is different, because the other Jew has not done anything wrong, and a Nazi officer said, we'll save your life if you kill this other Jew. That is not allowed. That's murder. A roidef, where it's self-defense, even goes where you see Jew A chasing Jew B with a knife. Jew C, that's the witness, can kill Jew A. And that's because he's stopping the perpetrator from killing B. Now, you could say maybe he changes his mind, maybe he doesn't. Well, looking at it, you don't know. So the first thing is that you can't just kill him outright. If possible, what you should do, Kevin, is try and injure him to prevent him from Jew A chasing Jew B. But if you can't, you can't kill him under the principle of roidef. Okay. So the interesting
One more thing, Damon.
Yeah.
Avodah Zorah, bowing down. Yeah, if someone commands a Jew to bow down,
well done.
tell Arthur. Yeah.
So the third aspect, which I actually was going to mention, but I clean forgot, thank God for Kevin, and even Gavin knows this, is that for idolatry practices, one has to give up their life rather than commit idolatry. Because idolatry is like adultery in a way. It is like adultery in a way. And why? Because it's disloyal. Somebody that's married that sleeps with another man is disloyal to a husband. Us serving other gods is disloyal to God. Taking somebody else's wife is stealing somebody else's wife. And if you have a look, murder is stealing somebody's life. So all of these things are your three cardinal sins that one has to give up their life rather than commit. Now, interestingly enough, Arthur, one can never, even on Yom Kippur, atone for a Chilul Hashem, the desecration of God's name. And where do we know this? We know this from Sanhedrin 74a and the Darim chapter 3 and chapter 9. And particularly, it's that severe that any amount of suffering, nor atoning in Yom Kippur atones for the desecration of the man. However, Hashem has done a chesed. In some cases, when a person dies, their death, providing obviously they've done the right to Shuvah, can atone for that Chilul Hashem in certain circumstances. But they have to die, and at that point, the suffering of their death is the only thing that